Though abandoned after a miscarriage, the cattle baron dug the grave and promised, "You'll smile again." The weight of silence. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Millbrook, a forgotten town where tumbleweeds rolled past weathered storefronts and hope seemed as scarce as rain. In a ramshackle cabin on the outskirts, Isabel Martinez sat hunched over a crude wooden table, her trembling hands clutching a faded photograph of what could have been. 3 weeks had passed since the miscarriage that shattered her world. The pain wasn't just physical, it was the crushing weight of failure, the whispered accusations from her own family, the cold shoulder from neighbors who once greeted her with warm smiles. In this conservative frontier town, a woman who couldn't carry a child to term was seen as cursed, broken, defective. "Isabel, you need to face facts," her sister Maria had said just that morning, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. "No decent man will want you now. You should consider moving to the city, start over somewhere nobody knows what happened." The words echoed in Isabel's mind as she stared at the empty cradle in the corner, a cruel reminder of dreams that died before they could draw breath. Her hands moved instinctively to her still tender abdomen, where life had briefly flickered before being extinguished by circumstances beyond her control. Outside, the wind howled through the mesquite trees, carrying with it the scent of dust and defeat. Isabel rose slowly, her body still aching from the loss, and walked to the cracked mirror hanging on the wall. The reflection staring back was almost unrecognizable, hollow eyes rimmed with perpetual tears, cheeks sunken from days of barely eating, hair hanging limp and lifeless. She had been engaged to Thomas Whitmore, the banker's son, until the scandal broke. The engagement ring, a simple band with a modest stone, now sat abandoned on the windowsill, catching the afternoon light like a mocking beacon. Thomas had been understanding at first, holding her as she sobbed, promising that they would try again. But as the town's judgment grew heavier and his father's business began to suffer from the association, his visits became shorter, his touches more distant. The final blow came when she overheard him talking to his father outside the general store. "I can't marry damaged goods, Pa. The whole town's watching, waiting to see if I'll be fool enough to tie myself to a woman who can't even do what nature intended." Those words had driven her to this isolated cabin, rented with her meager savings from seamstress work. Here, surrounded by nothing but her grief and the ghosts of what might have been, Isabel had begun to believe that perhaps Maria was right. Perhaps she was truly broken, condemned to a life of solitude and shame. As evening approached, she lit a single candle and sat by the window, watching the shadows grow longer across the barren landscape. In the distance, she could see the sprawling Carrington Ranch, its boundaries stretching as far as the eye could see. Arthur Carrington, the cattle baron who owned half the county, was said to be a fair man, though she had never met him personally. His wealth and power seemed like something from another world, a world where people like her didn't exist. The candle flickered as a gust of wind found its way through the cabin's gaps, and Isabel pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring another day of emptiness, another day of trying to find reason to continue when everything she had hoped for lay buried beneath the weight of judgment and loss. But tonight, as she had every night for the past 3 weeks, she would mourn not just the child she had lost, but the woman she used to be, the one who believed in second chances, who thought love could conquer all, who dared to dream of a future filled with laughter and tiny footsteps. That woman seemed as distant now as the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and Isabel wondered if she would ever find her way back to the light. Whispers in the wind. Arthur Carrington stood on the wraparound porch of his ranch house, his weathered hands gripping the railing as he surveyed the vast expanse of his domain. At 42, he was a man who had built his empire through grit, determination, and an unwavering sense of justice. The Carrington Ranch employed half the county, and Arthur took pride in treating his workers fairly, a reputation that had earned him respect from those who worked the land and wariness from those who preferred to exploit it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pastures where hundreds of cattle grazed peacefully. It was a sight that usually filled him with satisfaction, but today something else weighed on his mind. His foreman, Jake Stevens, approached with his hat in his hands, a gesture that always preceded difficult news. "Boss, there's something you ought to know," Jake said, his voice heavy with concern. "It's about that young woman, Isabel Martinez, the one who's been staying in the old Peterson cabin." Arthur had heard whispers about Isabel in town, fragments of conversation that painted a picture of tragedy and abandonment. In a community where gossip traveled faster than wildfire, he had learned to separate truth from speculation, but the story surrounding Isabel seemed to cut deeper than mere scandal. "What about her, Jake?" "Well, sir, Mrs. Henderson from the general store mentioned she hasn't been in for supplies in over a week. Said the girl looked like she was wasting away the last time she saw her. And there's talk," Jake shifted uncomfortably, "talk that she's been digging near the old oak tree behind the cabin." Arthur's jaw tightened. He had seen what isolation and grief could do to a person, had watched his own sister retreat into herself after losing her first child years ago. The difference was that Margaret had family support, a loving husband, and a community that rallied around her. Isabel, from what he understood, had none of those things. "Saddle up Thunder," Arthur commanded, his decision made. "I'm going to pay her a visit." "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, the townspeople might not take kindly to you involving yourself in her situation." Arthur's steely blue eyes fixed on his foreman. "Jake, in all the years you've known me, when have I ever made decisions based on what others might think?" The older man smiled and tipped his hat. "Never, sir. I'll have Thunder ready in 10 minutes. As Arthur prepared for the ride, he reflected on the cruel irony of frontier justice. In a land where survival often depended on community support, that same community could turn its back on those who needed it most. He had built his fortune on the principle that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth, regardless of their past mistakes or misfortunes. The ride to the Peterson cabin took him through familiar territory, rolling hills dotted with mesquite and oak, streams that ran clear and cold, and the endless sky that seemed to stretch into eternity. As he approached the small dwelling, Arthur noticed immediately how neglected it appeared. The garden was overgrown with weeds, the shutters hung askew, and an air of abandonment permeated the entire property. But it was the sound that stopped him cold, a low, keening wail that seemed to come from the very earth itself. Following the sound, Arthur guided Thunder around the side of the cabin and discovered a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Isabel knelt beside a small mound of freshly turned earth beneath an ancient oak tree. Her dress was torn and stained with dirt, her hair a wild tangle, and her hands were bloody from clawing at the ground with her bare fingers. She was singing, a Spanish lullaby that her mother had once sung to her, the words mixing with her tears as she rocked back and forth. "Duérmete, mi niño, duérmete ya," she whispered, her voice breaking with each note. "Sleep, my child, sleep now." Arthur dismounted slowly, his heart breaking at the raw grief before him. This wasn't just a woman mourning a miscarriage. This was a mother saying goodbye to a child she had never had the chance to hold, never had the chance to know. As he approached, Isabel looked up with eyes so filled with pain that Arthur had to steady himself against a nearby tree. She was beautiful, even in her devastation. High cheekbones, olive skin kissed by the sun, and dark eyes that spoke of depths he couldn't fathom. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please don't take this away from me. It's all I have left." Arthur knelt beside her, his presence solid and reassuring despite being a stranger. "Ma'am, I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I heard you might need help." Isabel's eyes searched his face, looking for deception, for judgment, for the condemnation she had grown accustomed to receiving. Instead, she found only compassion and an understanding that surprised her. "I'm Arthur Carrington," he said gently, "and I think it's time someone showed you the kindness you deserve." As the wind rustled through the oak leaves above them, Isabel felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. The faintest glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her story wasn't over yet. The promise of dawn. Arthur sat in the dirt beside Isabel for what felt like hours, neither speaking nor moving, simply sharing the weight of her grief. The sun climbed higher, casting dappled shadows through the oak leaves, and gradually Isabel's sobs subsided into quiet sniffles. She kept her eyes fixed on the small mound of earth as if looking away would somehow dishonor the memory of what she had lost. "I made this grave myself," she finally whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I know it seems foolish, but I needed somewhere to say goodbye. The church wouldn't allow a proper burial in the cemetery." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Arthur understood. In frontier towns like Millbrook, religious doctrine often overshadowed human compassion. The loss of an unborn child, especially under circumstances tinged with scandal, was rarely acknowledged with the dignity it deserved. "It's not foolish," Arthur said, his voice gentle but firm. "Every life, no matter how brief, deserves to be honored. You did what any loving mother would do." Isabel looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time. Arthur Carrington was known throughout the county as a man of principle, but she had expected someone harder, more businesslike. Instead, she found herself facing a man whose lined face spoke of years spent under the Texas sun, whose calloused hands told stories of honest work, and whose eyes held a kindness that she had almost forgotten existed. "Why are you here?" she asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "Surely you have more important things to do than sit with someone like me." Arthur studied her face, noting the way shame had become so deeply ingrained that she couldn't even speak of herself without self-recrimination. "Someone like you? You mean someone who's grieving? Someone who's been treated unfairly by people who should have shown compassion?" Isabel's breath caught. No one had spoken to her like this, without judgment, without the underlying assumption that she had somehow brought her troubles upon herself. "I heard about what happened," Arthur continued, about how your family turned their backs on you, how your fiancé broke his promise. I also heard about the courage it took to face all of that alone. Courage? Isabel's laugh was bitter. There's nothing courageous about hiding away like a wounded animal. There's nothing cowardly about taking time to heal, Arthur countered. But there comes a point when healing requires more than solitude. It requires purpose, community, and most importantly, it requires believing that your story isn't over yet. Isabel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of dirt across her cheeks. I don't know how to believe that anymore. I don't know how to be anything other than what I've become. Arthur stood slowly, his knees protesting after the long sit in the dirt. He walked to his horse and returned with a shovel from his saddlebag. Isabel watched with confusion as he tested the weight of the tool in his hands. What are you doing? This grave, Arthur said, gesturing to the small mound, was made with bare hands and heartbreak. Your child, and you, deserve better than that. Before Isabel could protest, Arthur began to dig, not to disturb what was already there, but to create something more permanent, more dignified. He worked with the steady rhythm of a man accustomed to hard labor, his movements precise and purposeful. As he worked, he spoke. I lost my wife in childbirth 7 years ago. Sarah and our son both died on the same night, and I thought my world had ended. For months I did exactly what you're doing now. I hid away, convinced that I was cursed, that I deserved nothing but misery. Isabel listened, transfixed by this revelation. Arthur Carrington, the powerful cattle baron, understood loss in a way she had never expected. What changed? She asked softly. Arthur paused in his digging, leaning on the shovel handle. I realized that my grief, while valid, was becoming a prison, and that Sarah wouldn't have wanted me to honor her memory by giving up on life. She would have wanted me to help others, to use my pain to understand theirs. He resumed digging, creating a proper grave with straight sides and careful dimensions. I'm not asking you to forget your loss or pretend it didn't happen. I'm asking you to consider that your capacity for love, the love you feel for the child you lost, is proof that you have more to give this world. When he finished, Arthur helped Isabel transfer the small bundle she had wrapped in her finest shawl to the new resting place. Together they covered it with earth, and Arthur fashioned a simple cross from fallen oak branches. Now, he said, his voice carrying a weight of promise, you're going to smile again. Isabel looked at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. I don't understand. You will, Arthur said, extending his hand to help her to her feet. I'm offering you a position at my ranch, not as a servant, but as someone with a purpose. I have a garden that's been neglected since Sarah died, and I think you're exactly the person to bring it back to life. Isabel stared at his outstretched hand, then at the fresh grave, then back at his face. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. I know enough, Arthur replied. I know you're a woman who loved deeply enough to grieve this deeply. I know you're strong enough to survive what would have broken others, and I know that sometimes, the best way to honor what we've lost is to nurture what can still grow. As Isabel slowly reached out to take his hand, she felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future that might contain something other than sorrow. I don't know if I remember how to smile, she admitted as Arthur helped her to her feet. Then we'll start with getting you cleaned up and fed, Arthur said practically. Smiles come easier when you're not carrying the weight of the world alone. As they walked toward his horse, Isabel glanced back once at the grave beneath the oak tree. It would always be there, a reminder of love and loss, but now it felt less like an ending and more like a beginning, the first page of a story that might yet have chapters worth reading. Seeds of tomorrow. The Carrington ranch house rose from the prairie like a testament to perseverance, its whitewashed walls and red tile roof creating a striking contrast against the endless Texas sky. Isabel had never seen anything quite like it. Not a mansion by Eastern standards, but a home that spoke of success earned through honest work and careful stewardship of the land. Arthur helped her down from Thunder, his hands steady and respectful as he guided her to the ground. Isabel's legs trembled slightly, whether from exhaustion, hunger, or the overwhelming nature of the day's events, she couldn't say. The ranch hands who worked nearby tipped their hats respectfully to their boss, their curious glances at Isabel polite but restrained. Mrs. Rodriguez? Arthur called to a plump, motherly woman who emerged from the house wiping her hands on her apron. Would you please prepare a bath and a meal for Miss Martinez? She'll be staying with us for a while. Carmen Rodriguez, the ranch's housekeeper and cook, took one look at Isabel's condition and immediately shifted into nurturing mode. Of course, Senor Arthur. Come, mija, she said to Isabel, her voice warm with maternal concern. Let's get you cleaned up and fed properly. As Carmen led Isabel into the house, Arthur called after them. Mrs. Rodriguez, please show Miss Martinez to the blue room, and perhaps you could find her some of Sarah's clothes, the ones in the cedar chest. Isabel paused at the mention of Sarah's name, turning to look at Arthur with questioning eyes. The fact that he would offer her his deceased wife's belongings spoke to a generosity that went beyond mere kindness. "Are you certain?" Isabel asked quietly. Arthur nodded, his expression gentle but resolute. "Sarah would have wanted them to be used, not left to gather dust. She was about your size and she had excellent taste." The blue room was more luxurious than any accommodation Isabel had ever experienced. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, illuminating a bed covered in a hand-stitched quilt, a mahogany dresser with an ornate mirror, and a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin. It was a guest room, but it felt like a sanctuary. Carmen bustled about, filling the washstand with warm water and laying out clean towels. "You take your time, mija. The bath is being prepared, and I'll have fresh clothes waiting for you. When you're ready, come to the kitchen. I'll have something warm for you to eat." Alone for the first time in hours, Isabel caught sight of herself in the mirror and gasped. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, hair matted with dirt and tears, dress torn and stained, eyes hollow with grief. But there was something else there too, something that hadn't been present when she looked at herself in the cabin's cracked mirror that morning, a spark of something that might, with time and care, grow into hope. The bath was a luxury she had almost forgotten existed. As Isabel sank into the warm water, she felt layers of dirt and despair begin to wash away. Carmen had added lavender oil to the water, and the scent was soothing, reminiscent of better times when such small pleasures had been part of her daily life. As she bathed, Isabel found herself thinking about Arthur's words at the graveside. The idea that her grief could serve a purpose, that her capacity for love was an asset rather than a burden, was foreign to her. For weeks she had been told by family and community that she was damaged, that her loss was somehow her fault. But Arthur spoke of her pain as if it were evidence of her humanity, not proof of her failure. After the bath, Isabel found a simple but elegant dress laid out on the bed, a deep blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered around the neckline. Sarah's dress. As she slipped it on, Isabel felt a strange connection to the woman who had worn it before her, another woman who had loved and lost, who had found happiness despite tragedy. The kitchen was warm and welcoming, filled with the aromas of fresh bread and simmering stew. Carmen had prepared a feast, beef stew with vegetables from the ranch's garden, cornbread still warm from the oven, and coffee that smelled like salvation itself. "Eat slowly, mija," Carmen advised as Isabel began to devour the meal. "Your stomach needs time to remember what real food feels like." As Isabel ate, Carmen shared stories about the ranch, about Arthur's fairness as an employer, about the garden that had once been Sarah's pride and joy. "She had such a gift," Carmen said, her voice soft with memory. "Could make anything grow, even in the driest years. The garden has been empty since she passed, but Senor Arthur, he's been waiting for the right person to bring it back to life." "Why me?" Isabel asked between bites. "He doesn't know anything about my gardening skills." Carmen's knowing smile suggested she understood more than she was letting on. "Senor Arthur, he has good instincts about people. He sees things others miss. And sometimes, mija, the best gardeners are those who understand that beautiful things can grow from the darkest soil." After the meal, Arthur appeared at the kitchen door, his presence commanding but not intimidating. "Miss Martinez, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to show you something." Isabel followed him through the house and out the back door, where a large plot of land stretched between the house and the barn. It had once been a garden, that much was clear, but now it was overgrown with weeds and neglect. A few hardy roses still bloomed along what had once been a carefully planned border, their persistence a testament to the love that had originally planted them. "This was Sarah's domain," Arthur said, his voice carrying both sadness and pride. "She spent hours here every day, planning, planting, nurturing. She used to say that a garden was proof that tomorrow would be better than today." Isabel walked slowly among the overgrown beds, her trained eye beginning to see past the neglect to the bones of what had once been a masterpiece. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Even like this, you can see how much love went into it." "I'd like you to restore it," Arthur said directly. "Not to replace what Sarah built, but to honor it by making it live again. I'll provide whatever you need, tools, seeds, help from the ranch hands. All I ask is that you pour into it the same love that you showed at that grave today." Isabel turned to face him, tears again threatening to spill. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I have anything left to give." Arthur stepped closer, his voice gentle but insistent. "You have everything to give. You have love that needs somewhere to go, energy that needs a purpose, and a future that's waiting to be planted." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Isabel found herself nodding. "I'll try," she whispered. "I can't promise I'll succeed, but I'll try." Arthur's smile was the first genuine warmth Isabel had seen directed at her in weeks. "That's all anyone can ask for. And Miss Martinez, when you're ready, when the time is right, you'll find that smiles grow in gardens just as surely as flowers do." As they walked back toward the house, Isabel felt something she hadn't experienced since the miscarriage, the stirring of purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fail or succeed, but tonight, for the first time in weeks, she was looking forward to dawn, blooming in the aftermath. 3 weeks into her residence at the Carrington Ranch, Isabel had established a routine that gave structure to her healing. Each morning, she rose before dawn to tend to the garden, working in the cool stillness before the Texas sun grew too intense. The physical labor was therapeutic, each handful of pulled weeds and turned soil a small victory against the chaos that had consumed her life. Arthur had been true to his word, providing her with every tool and resource she needed. More importantly, he had given her space to grieve while gently encouraging her to look toward the future. He would often appear at the garden's edge in the early morning or late evening, coffee in hand, ready to listen if she wanted to talk, or simply to provide silent companionship if she preferred solitude. "The roses are responding well to your care," Arthur observed one morning as Isabel carefully pruned a climbing rose that had been choking on its own overgrowth. Sarah would be pleased to see them blooming again. Isabel paused in her work, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her gloved hand. She had excellent taste in varieties. This one, she gestured to a bush heavy with deep red blooms, is a Mr. Lincoln. It's hardy, disease-resistant, and the fragrance is incredible. Arthur watched as Isabel's face lit up when she talked about the plants. It was the first time he had seen her express genuine enthusiasm about anything, and the transformation was remarkable. The hollow-eyed woman he had found beside the makeshift grave was gradually being replaced by someone who had reasons to smile. "I've been thinking," Arthur said carefully, "about expanding the garden. There's that patch of land near the creek that gets good morning sun. Might be perfect for vegetables." Isabel's eyes brightened at the suggestion. "I could plant tomatoes, peppers, maybe some herbs. Carmen mentioned that she has to send to town for most of her cooking herbs." "Then it's settled," Arthur said, his tone suggesting that her enthusiasm was all the permission he needed. "I'll have Jake and some of the men clear the land this week." As Arthur walked away, Isabel felt a familiar pang of guilt. The kindness he showed her, the resources he provided, the patience he demonstrated, it all felt like more than she deserved. But gradually she was learning to accept his generosity not as charity, but as the natural expression of a man who understood that healing required both time and purpose. The garden became Isabel's sanctuary, but it was also her teacher. Each plant required different care, different patience, different understanding. The delicate orchids that Sarah had cultivated in a small greenhouse needed gentle attention and precise conditions. The hardy sunflowers that bordered the main beds required little more than water and sun. The herbs thrived on benign neglect, while the roses demanded constant vigilance against disease and pests. It was while tending to a particularly stubborn patch of mint that Isabel encountered Maria Santos, the town's schoolteacher, who had come to the ranch to discuss a business matter with Arthur. Maria was one of the few people in Millbrook who had shown Isabel kindness during her darkest days, and their friendship had been one of the casualties of Isabel's isolation. "Isabel?" Maria's voice was hesitant, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Is that really you?" Isabel looked up from her work, suddenly self-conscious about the dirt under her fingernails and the simple work dress she wore. But Maria's expression wasn't one of judgment, it was one of wonder. "You look different," Maria said, approaching slowly. "You look alive again." Isabel stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "I feel different, better, not healed exactly, but hopeful maybe." Maria's eyes took in the transformed garden, the carefully tended beds, the evidence of new growth everywhere. "This is incredible. You did all this?" "Arthur gave me the opportunity," Isabel said quickly, "and Mrs. Rodriguez has been teaching me about the plants Sarah originally chose. It's been—" She paused, searching for words. "It's been healing." The two women walked slowly through the garden paths, Isabel pointing out various plants and explaining their care requirements. As they talked, Maria noticed something that Isabel herself might not have been aware of. She was smiling, not the forced, polite smiles of social obligation, but genuine expressions of pleasure and pride. "I heard what Arthur did," Maria said quietly, as they paused beside a fountain that Isabel had recently restored to working order. "About the grave, about bringing you here. People in town are talking." Isabel's smile faltered slightly. "What kind of talk?" "The good kind, mostly," Maria assured her. "Oh, there are always those who find fault with kindness, but most people are saying that Arthur Carrington is exactly the kind of man this county needs. Someone who sees potential where others see only problems." As if summoned by their conversation, Arthur appeared from the direction of the barn, his hat in his hands, and his hair mussed from the wind. When he saw Maria, his expression became more formal, more businesslike. "Miss Santos, I apologize for keeping you waiting. I was dealing with a situation with some of the horses." "No need to apologize, Mr. Carrington," Maria replied. Isabel has been giving me a tour of the garden. It's absolutely beautiful. Arthur's eyes sought Isabel's, and she was surprised to see what looked like pride in his expression. Miss Martinez has worked miracles here. Sarah's garden is more beautiful now than it ever was. The compliment sent warmth through Isabel's chest, but it was Maria's knowing look that made her realize something important. Arthur's praise meant more to her than it should have. Somewhere in the process of healing, somewhere between the grave and the garden, her feelings for her benefactor had begun to shift from gratitude to something deeper. That evening, as Isabel worked late in the garden by lamplight, Arthur found her planting bulbs that wouldn't bloom until spring, an act of faith in a future she was finally beginning to believe in. "You're working late," he observed, settling onto a nearby bench that he had installed the previous week. "I wanted to get these tulips in before the weather turns," Isabel explained, not looking up from her work. "They need time to establish roots before winter." Arthur watched her work, noting the careful way she placed each bulb, the gentle way she covered them with soil. "You're planting for seasons you haven't seen yet," he said thoughtfully. Isabel paused, considering his words. "I suppose I am. A few weeks ago I couldn't imagine next week, let alone next spring. But now," she gestured to the garden around them, "now I'm curious to see what will grow." Arthur's smile was soft in the lamplight. "I told you that you'd smile again." Isabel looked at him then, really looked at him, and realized that Maria had been right. She was smiling, not just with her mouth but with her eyes, with her entire being. The broken woman who had knelt beside a crude grave was still part of her, would always be part of her, but she was no longer the whole story. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. For the grave, for this opportunity, for believing I could heal when I couldn't believe it myself." Arthur stood and walked to where she knelt among the flower beds. "You did the healing, Isabel. I just provided the soil. You provided the strength to grow." As he helped her to her feet, his hands lingering on hers perhaps a moment longer than necessary, Isabel felt the stirring of something she had thought lost forever, the possibility of love, not the desperate, needy love of her youth, but something deeper, more mature, built on mutual respect and understanding. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had come so far from the woman who had wept beside that makeshift grave, but was she ready for something as complex as love? And more importantly, could a man like Arthur Carrington truly care for a woman with her history, her scars, her continuing journey toward wholeness? As they walked back toward the house together, Isabel found herself hoping that spring would bring more than just the tulips she had planted. Perhaps it would bring the answers to questions she was only beginning to have the courage to ask. The Garden of Second Chances. 6 months had passed since Arthur found Isabel beside the makeshift grave, and the approaching spring had transformed both the garden and the woman who tended it. The Carrington Ranch had become a destination for visitors from neighboring counties, all eager to see the legendary garden that had risen from neglect to become a showcase of botanical beauty. Isabel stood among the spring tulips she had planted the previous fall, their bright colors a testament to the faith she had placed in unseen tomorrows. The garden now boasted over 100 varieties of flowers, an extensive herb garden that supplied both the ranch kitchen and several restaurants in nearby towns, and a greenhouse where she experimented with exotic plants that had never been grown in Texas before. But it wasn't just the garden that had flourished. Isabel herself had become an integral part of the ranch community. She advised other ranchers on landscaping, taught gardening classes to the wives of neighboring families, and had even begun writing a weekly column for the county newspaper about seasonal gardening tips. Arthur watched from the porch as Isabel worked with 2 of the ranch hands, teaching them how to properly prune the fruit trees he had planted at her suggestion. Her transformation over the past months had been remarkable, not just physically, though her health and vitality had returned, but emotionally and spiritually as well. The woman who had once believed herself irreparably broken now radiated a quiet confidence that drew people to her. She had found her smile again, just as Arthur had promised, but it was more than that. She had found her purpose, her strength, and most importantly, her ability to love again. "Mr. Carrington," called Jake Stevens, approaching the porch with a letter in his hand. "This came for you from town. Looks official." Arthur opened the letter, his expression growing serious as he read. Isabel noticed his change in demeanor from across the garden and approached, her face creased with concern. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing the look of a man receiving unwelcome news. "It's from the County Development Board," Arthur said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They want to run a railroad spur through the eastern section of the ranch. They're claiming eminent domain." Isabel's heart sank. The eastern section was where they had planned to expand the garden, where Arthur had talked about building a proper conservatory for her botanical experiments. More than that, it was home to the oak tree under which her child lay buried, the place where her healing had begun. "Can they do that?" Isabel asked, though she already suspected the answer. Arthur nodded grimly. They have the legal right, and they're offering what they consider fair compensation, but it's not about the money, it's about what that land represents. Isabel felt a familiar stab of panic, the same helplessness she had experienced when her family abandoned her, when Thomas broke their engagement, when the world seemed determined to take away everything she held dear. But this time the panic was accompanied by something else, a fierce determination to fight for what mattered. "We won't let them," she said firmly. "There has to be something we can do." Arthur looked at her with surprise and admiration. 6 months ago, Isabel would have accepted this setback as proof that she was destined for loss. Now she was ready to fight for her future. "Actually," Arthur said slowly, "there might be. I've been thinking about this for weeks, ever since I heard rumors about the railroad. There's one way to protect the land permanently." Isabel waited, her heart racing as she sensed that whatever Arthur was about to say would change everything. "If we were married," Arthur continued, his voice gentle but serious, "the land would be protected under the Married Women's Property Act. You would have legal rights that even the railroad company couldn't.